The word economy, like ecology, comes from the Greek root oikos, meaning home or household. Economies and ecologies are therefore about managing and studying and maintaining the household, our families, our societies, and our planet. That means it goes beyond money and resources, doesn't it? It's really about wellness and balance and relationships. Welcome to Digesting Food Studies, the podcast that ecologizes food systems and trades in economies both social and cultural, as well as political and informal. I'm your bean counter and rice cooker, David Santo. On today's show, we're exploring how food systems and food practices might be rethought and even reoriented, particularly towards creating integrated value exchanges beyond just the financial kind. Our guests explore different ways in which sharing, gifting, and informal economies have been around for, forever, and how they might be seeing a new resurgence that offers promise for the long term. But they also raise questions about how food systems can equally engender oppression and reproduce inequities. Our focus is the themed issue of Canadian Food Studies, The Social and Informal Economy of Food, Volume 6, Number 3, which we published in November 2019. As usual, Alexia Moyer kicks things off with an amuse-bouche, though this one spans a larger-than-usual slice of history, ranging from an artwork by Renaissance painter Sandro Botticelli to the 19th century writings of naturalist Catherine Parr Traill. Alexia treats us to an insightful exploration of the gift economy and all the social implications therein. After that, Irena Knezevic discusses her experience as one of the guest editors of our focus issue, including the wide range of themes and cases that authors in this issue cover. There's a lot to be inspired by. Finally, Master of Social Work graduate Christophe Dubois shares his thoughts on how social gastronomy can be a means to achieve widespread benefits across economies and human experience, as well as the ways in which well-meaning efforts to do good can be undermined by undercurrents of more business-oriented priorities. His aftertaste segment is in French, and an English language translation can be found in the transcript. Alexia, I have a question for you.
Shoot.
Are you feeling social? Informal?
Gift.
Gift?
Yeah.
Do you have a gift for us?
I do.
Okay. Hand it over.
All right. So this is going to sound slightly torturous, but today I'd like to start with Renaissance painter Sandro Botticelli.
Okay.
And then it's going to lead us to author and naturalist Catherine Parr Traill.
That is a voyage I will go along with.
So what do they have in common, you ask? But indeed, there is a connection worth making here. I'm thinking specifically about a fresco by Botticelli, circa 1483, 1486, and it's called Venus and the Three Graces Presenting Gifts to a Young Woman.
Oh, I thought it was going to be called Sustainable Food Systems Today and Then. Sorry.
To the left of the fresco is a multicolored cortege of 4 women, Venus and the Three Graces, one dressed in purple and green, one in white, one in an orangey yellow, and one in pink. And to the right is a young woman in a deep wine-colored dress with her arms stretched out before her. My source here is Thomas Schlesser, art historian, also novelist, and he writes a chapter in the novel Les Yeux de Mona, or Mona's Eyes, in which he describes not only the painting, but how we are to read it. He tells us the 3 graces are allegories, and they are said to represent the 3 stages that render us social and hospitable beings. The 3 things that make us human. The first is to know how to give. The third is how to return or give in return. And the second, and the one that is at the center of this piece, is how to receive. Okay, so it's a sort of, it is a system. It's a system of circular giving. Yes. Oh. Yes. In fact, this system is an important word that I'd like to touch on. So when I joked about sustainability, I wasn't far off. Yeah. Now, it is unlikely that Catherine Parr Traill knew about this fresco when she was writing The Female Emigrant's Guide, which, being near Peterborough in 1855, was some 20 years before the fresco was rediscovered, or rather uncovered, at the Villa Lemmi in Florence. Wow. But like the Renaissance painter, here it comes, Traill too demonstrates an interest in this idea of giving and receiving and returning. Now, the Female Emigrant's Guide, for those of you wanting to add this to your reading list, I have a copy. I take it with me everywhere. It's just that. It's a guide for newcomers of the feminine persuasion. So alongside advice on how to prepare bacon for smoking or drying, or make cheese, or how to make your own grafting wax, Traill is also at pains to remind us that these things don't occur in a vacuum, because this land is peopled, and therefore there is inevitable exchange in various forms between such peoples.
Right.
Now, she refers to such practices a number of times as a borrowing system, which would suggest that within this economy, there is a set of principles and procedures that must be upheld for social relations to function in the best possible way. So while it is not formal in the strictest sense of the term, like money for goods, there are formalities and complexities that develop and change over time. So some are obvious, and some are personal to Parr Traill's experiences and preferences. Those that are commonly agreed upon are not to refuse your neighbors in their hour of need. For, as she writes, you also may be glad of a similar favor. In the backwoods especially, people cannot be independent of the help and sympathy of their fellow creatures.
Right. Well, this is resonating with an article sometimes used to teach about the origins of domestication and feasting and social safety nets that were created through the exchange of food surpluses, sort of the continuous cycles of payment and repayment and lending or offering and repayment. It's all very historic. Anyway, keep going. Sorry.
Well, this is especially important in rural areas, her suggestion is, as opposed to towns and cities, because supplies are scarce.
Right.
So that exchange of goods and services can be a lifeline. So what kinds of things are changing hands? A cup full of tea, sugar, yeast, medication. But there are certain things that Traill doesn't ask for and doesn't lend, one of them being clothes. She describes a neighbor who asked to borrow, and this in one request, a best nightcap, presumably for looking good while keeping your head warm while you sleep, 3 worked lace or muslined collars, a pair of walking boots, a straw hat, and a small tooth comb.
Wow. So the original things you described were very much sort of the basics of survival, but these are, well, not luxuries. These are nice to haves, not need to haves.
Yes. This is for someone who was going visiting and wanted to look good while doing it.
And presumably looking good was also sort of a social gift.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
So Traill refuses, but she does gift 2 of the collars to the young woman, rather than harbor expectations of getting them back. So she's hoping to inform newcomers that there is this system in place, that there are uses and abuses of that system. Some of the ways of doing include taking a measurement of what is given, noting it down to avoid confusion or misunderstanding. Traill's emphasis is mostly written from the perspective of the giver. That's partly because she had already been there for 20 years when she wrote the book. And so she was more in a position to help.
Right, yeah. More established.
Yes, yeah. Although she does stress that the receiver returned things on time and in the condition in which they were lent, and not to ask too much of the same person. Traill closes this discussion with an apology. She writes, I might write an amusing chapter on the subject of borrowing, but I leave it to those who have abler pens than mine and more lively talents for amusing their readers. One senses that she's holding back here, that she's had lots of experience with borrowing and lending that she would like to share, and that there is more to be said on the subject.
I love this. This is, well, as we will talk with Irena Knezevic shortly in the interview in this episode, the histories of social and circular and gift and informal economies clearly go back, well, presumably long before Botticelli even, but it's nice to see these reference points, and what a wonderful way to open this episode. Thank you. It's
a way of understanding how complex and how changing they actually are.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Irena Knezevic is an associate professor in the School of Journalism and Communication at Carleton University. She researches communication, culture, and health, including such themes as food labeling, health communications and advertising, and health equity. Along with Charles Levko, Phil Mount, and Connie Nelson, she was a guest editor of the CFS issue on the social and informal economy of food. So, Irena, welcome to Digesting Food Studies. Today, we're going to digest a little bit of what you have to say and some of what the authors in this special issue that you were guest editor for all the way back in 2019 have to say about the social economy of food. And so maybe you could just start with a brief explanation of what the social economy is to begin with.
So social economy is a concept that can be used in various ways, but typically really refers to economic activities that aren't purely focused on profit. So social economy, when we use that term, what we're often talking about is something that is sometimes also called the third sector. So it's not the private or public sector, but it's more of that kind of community-oriented sector. Typical examples of social economy would include things like cooperatives, where people cooperate to perhaps produce a little bit of profit, but not necessarily are focused on profit only. And so in our case with this special issue, what we were trying to do is actually look at food systems and look at the role of social economy as well as informal economy. And if you want to talk more about that, I can also speak to that a little bit.
I do want to hear about that.
Excellent. So what we really wanted to do is look at activities that take place in communities across Canada that are activities that have something to do with food, that generate some kind of income or profit for people involved, but also provide other benefits to not just people involved, but to larger society. So often these will include social and environmental benefits. Examples of that would be if somebody decides to, say, take a part of their farm out of production in order to renaturalize that area. What they're doing is reducing their potential profit from that farm, but what they're offering in turn is something that we call environmental services because they're improving biodiversity in the area.
So this is still economic in the sense of money and exchange and capitalism, but not only about, as you say, about profit. It's about benefiting multiple parts of food systems, including the economic parts, but also the social, environmental, presumably other places as well, cultural value of some sort that's being created through these processes.
Indeed. And I will also add that it kind of redefines what we mean by economy, because one of the things that social economy research focuses on is what are the economic benefits that cannot be measured through monetary means. So for instance, if we improve diet in a community by, say, providing good, healthy, nutritious school lunches to children who go to school, well, the benefit of that cannot be measured in monetary means right away. We can only guesstimate what the potential benefits would be down the road by the health benefits that children derive from eating those healthy, nutritious lunches. So if this has long-term impact on their health and their eating habits, as a society, we probably will save money in healthcare. But this is not something that we can easily represent in dollar signs and charts and tables that just represent numbers, because this is really difficult to estimate. So it really kind of also redefines what we mean by economic. And in this case, we're really talking, especially with food systems, we're talking about economy as use of resources that are sometimes monetary, but as we often kind of revert to using this term in the special issue, is that these are activities that deal with more than market economies.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. This is a way of thinking about economics in the classic systemic sense. When we talk about food systems and all of the different systems that food systems comprise, they're all interacting together. Economies, plural, are interacting within food systems with other things that are happening. And so taking this bigger systemic perspective on how value is made, created, exchanged, pushed around, and it's not only value that's financial. Is that sort of fair to say?
That is totally fair to say. And we were really motivated by research by a Nobel Prize winning economist, Elinor Ostrom, who redefined what we think about the commons in the traditional economic terms. So many of your listeners will be familiar with the tragedy of commons, this concept that, if we just let people use public resources without any kind of control or regulation, and nobody's really personally owning those resources, that people will overuse resources and probably generate damage in forms of pollution or soil erosion or whatever else it might be. Ostrom's work demonstrated that this only happens when the shared resources are shared among people who don't know each other or don't know each other very well. If you're sharing resources in a social setting that resembles something like a community where we know each other and we have a sense of social obligation to one another, what we see is that people actually tend to take care of these shared resources as well as they would if they were their private property.
It's like in a family setting, one person isn't going to eat all the food in the fridge just because it's there, because they know that their family members will go hungry or they'll get hangry anyway, and there'll be fights in the household. So it's about that bigger set of relationships that the economy is part of, but not the only dynamic that exists between people, the money dynamic.
Absolutely. You're spot on.
So this, as I mentioned at the start of our chat, this issue of Canadian food studies came out in 2019. That was before the great big black hole of 2020, 21, 22 and COVID. And so much has been changing over the last couple of years as well, particularly this year. So when you think back to where we were in 2019 or 2018 as these articles were being written, and then you were editing them and pulling them together and creating this issue, what's your take on that? All that stuff that has changed, that has evolved, the importance of the social economy then, the importance of the social economy now. What's different? What's the same? Why is this still so important?
Well, at the risk of sounding like I'm patting ourselves on the back, I would say that this work was probably a bit more prescient than we imagined it would be.
Yeah.
What we did see during COVID, for instance, is that people did turn to supporting their local food businesses in ways that they had never done before. They didn't ask if this food was more expensive. They didn't ask, where the profits went. What they knew was they wanted to support community businesses because they understood that those small businesses are at the heart of their communities and their communities' well-being. So that's one example. The other example is trade. I think increasingly Canadians are recognizing that if we want to have food security, we have to start with kind of looking inward, making sure that we have a healthy, environmentally, socially, and physically healthy food system that can provide food for us, even if that means that some of those actors, businesses, farms, food processors, retailers, whoever else might be involved in food along the value chain, even if they make a little less money than they have in the past, that this is a way to ensure that we actually have a food future, as opposed to being dependent on outside actors from whom we might profit a little more, but the risks that come with that profit are pretty high and have a really high social and environmental cost.
And I would say, just to go back, you're not patting yourself on the back too much. I think you're patting yourself on the back just the right amount, because it really is. So much has been revealed when the old normativities just don't fly anymore, whether it's because of a pandemic or because of a lunatic or because of some other issue that's going on globally that draws attention to the fact that food has always been too cheap, and we're suddenly coming face to face with why that inexpensive food has been available and what it's been doing in the other parts of society and environment completely unsustainably. So this is really, I think this is kind of foundational to whatever is going to happen in the future if we're going to be sane and well and healthful. In the work that you did working with the authors of the different articles, and there are many, many articles in this issue, what are some of your favorite moments or insights from this issue, whether it's an article or an experience with an author or an experience pulling it all together?
I think it was the experience of pulling it all together as a whole that really still resonates with me in the ways that we worked with researchers who worked on projects that might seem a little disparate. So I'll use two examples that I'm intimately familiar with because I co-authored both of those articles, but one deals with the Fruit Rescue Organization in Ottawa. So this is an organization that encourages people who have fruit trees on their property, as well as fruit trees and nut trees on public land, to go and harvest the fruits of these trees. For instance, if a fruit tree is in somebody's private yard, volunteers will go and pick the fruit. They'll take a third of the fruit home. They'll leave a third of the fruit to the property owner, and then the last third will be donated to a community organization. There's a food bank or a community food center of some sort.
Fantastic.
Now, there's no money exchanged, but we realize that this is an economic activity. Right? And it is not only a social economy activity, it is in this case an informal economy activity because nobody's tracking these numbers. There's no formal recognition of this as an economic activity. Nobody's being taxed. It just happens in communities, but it has economic values because food circulates through this activity. On the other side, there is the example of FarmWorks Investment Cooperative in Nova Scotia, which is a community investment fund where people basically buy shares in this investment fund, and the money that's collected through the shares is lent to small food businesses in the province. That money is lent with low interest, but it's also provided to the loan takers with advice from the board of directors of this investment co-op. So it actually comes with these supports that enable Nova Scotia food system to grow and thrive. And it has really made a significant difference in the province. But what's really interesting about that is that it is a fund that encourages people to invest their money in a way that they might make a little less profit if they invested into mutual funds or some kind of corporate shareholding. But the return that they get on their investment includes benefits to their communities. Mm-hmm. So they'll take a little less financial profit in order to ensure that food production and food processing and food distribution in their province can actually thrive. And so these are very different examples. One is an investment fund that actually fully benefits from market forces and these models of investment and financialization of food. And on the other hand, there's this completely voluntary community activity where no money is exchanged. But what they have in common, what we see across the examples in the special issue, is this motivation to not incur economic costs, but still be able to provide social and environmental benefits, in addition to perhaps relatively smaller economic benefits or financial benefits, I should say, but they still contribute to community well-being.
Yeah, so that's coming back to this idea of more than. It's systemic. It's producing value in a systemic way, integrating all those values together to see them as whole and not separable into monetary units.
Indeed.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
You touched on the informal economy. I'm wondering if there's any work you're doing right now that you'd like to highlight as part of the social economy or informal economy of food, and what this issue of Canadian food studies helped you think about more or do more with.
It's interesting to ask that question. This issue did lead me to some other collaborations and working with organizations that try to find ways to support actors in the food system, small-scale actors, so be they producers, processors, distributors, retailers, whatever that might be. And I think it opened up doors to kind of look at some of these activities that are formally economic, but that also entail a wide range of informal economy. And I think to a lot of your listeners who have worked with community organizations, this would be familiar. But when we just think about the sheer number of volunteer hours that many community organizations, even employees and not just volunteers, put into strengthening our local food systems and sustainable food systems, this is something that I think is going to be an interest of mine for as long as I continue doing this work. But it also made me think more about these kind of informal dimensions. So in your responses, you've been really emphasizing the kind of systemic nature of thinking that has to go into work that deals with social and informal economy. And one of the things that this led me to is a collaboration with a former PhD student, Jen Marshman, where I actually worked with her on a piece that took this social economy angle to look at the role of bees as pollinators in our ecosystems and specifically in food systems. And so bees are not somebody, and I'm using that term purposefully, somebody that we consider as an active actor in our food systems. We think of bees perhaps maybe as a product that gets shipped on a truck to a farm to pollinate. Mm-hmm. But we really don't think about bees in the same way that we think about human actors in food systems. And it really kind of expanded my thinking to give more consideration to who and what is required and is involved and needs to be sustained over time in order for us to have a truly sustainable food system.
So seeing, not externalizing bees, for example, or externalizing health or externalizing well-being, but bring that into the balance, making it clear that they are part of it and that, as you say, they're actors.
And if we don't take care of them, that the real financial costs to all of us as humanity down the road are going to be huge and already are.
This is what makes, for me, this concept of social economy so valuable is it's not saying, oh, to hell with money, to hell with value, to hell with creating things and selling them. It's about making that a bigger picture portrait of value, not just economic.
Indeed. And I think it would be just impossible in good conscience do this kind of work and just say, we don't really care about formal economy. We don't really care about markets or financial ends of things that have to do with food, because it's an incredibly unfair statement to make in the kind of economic systems that we all live in on this planet. Yeah. That is that we all need money to survive. We all need material resources to survive and thrive and be healthy and productive members of our communities. And so this is really about thinking about economies as kind of a part of a bigger system of existence in which we engage as human beings who don't live as individuals, who live as parts of their communities.
Well, on that note, thank you for being part of my community and sharing all of this wonderful, insightful, really eye-opening work with our community of Canadian food studies. It's great to have you with us. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Christophe Dubois is a recent graduate of the master's program in social work at l'Université du Québec à Montréal. A former restaurant cook, he currently devotes his time to the practice of social gastronomy, helping young people develop skills and work experience in food. He's also the producer of the documentary series La gastronomie sociale, available on the Télé-Québec website. Christophe Dubois est récemment diplômé du programme de maîtrise en travail social de l'Université du Québec à Montréal. Ancien cuisinier dans la restauration, il se consacre actuellement à la pratique de la gastronomie sociale, aidant les jeunes à acquérir des compétences et une expérience professionnelle dans le domaine alimentaire. Il est également le producteur de la série documentaire La gastronomie sociale, disponible sur le site web de Télé-Québec.
Je m'appelle Christophe Dubois et je suis candidat à la maîtrise en travail social à l'Université du Québec à Montréal. Mes champs d'études se concentrent principalement autour de la gastronomie sociale, une pratique qui est en expansion mais qui est encore peu connue et encore moins documentée par le milieu académique. Je m'intéresse aussi au phénomène d'entrepreneuriat, qui est une tendance à reproduire les pratiques du milieu de l'entreprise, spécifiquement dans le milieu communautaire. Et je m'intéresse aussi aux différentes formes de participation. Mes recherches et mes intérêts de recherche sont grandement influencés par mes expériences. Depuis une dizaine d'années, j'évolue en tant qu'intervenant ou organisateur communautaire dans des projets d'alimentation sociale ou de gastronomie sociale. Je crois sincèrement au potentiel transformateur de la nourriture et de la cuisine. Depuis 10 ans, à peu près, je suis témoin de la création de liens riches et sensibles avec entre personnes qui participent à différents projets de gastronomie sociale. Je suis témoin de discussions qui sont parfois difficiles, de chocs culturels qui sont nécessaires, mais surtout, j'ai découvert autre chose de la gastronomie. Quelque chose de plus profond, quelque chose qui peut pas se retrouver sur des nappes immaculées ou avec des étoiles. J'ai découvert de la vulnérabilité, la vraie, celle qui fait pleurer, qui pousse à crier à l'injustice. Et puis, il y a la révolution. J'ai découvert que la nourriture, c'est juste un prétexte, finalement, pour qu'on se parle, qu'on s'écoute, qu'on fasse communauté. C'est dans ce sens-là que j'ai particulièrement accroché aux propos de Marianne Martin dans son article Digging Through Urban Agriculture with Feminist Theoretical Implements, qui démontre avec brio l'importance de cultiver une approche féministe, critique, pour questionner les injustices épistémiques et structurelles qui peuvent persister dans les projets d'agriculture urbaine. Martin démontre d'abord la domination masculine, patriarcale, au cœur des mondes agricoles, puis met en lumière le second rôle des femmes dans cet univers. Puis ça me fait beaucoup penser à ce que j'observe en cuisine. Quand la cuisine, cet espace gastronomique par excellence, est devenu un lieu de reconnaissance sociale et de pouvoir, l'homme se l'est approprié et relayé la femme à la cuisine domestique, faisant de cette autre cuisine, cette cuisine-là plus normale, disons, un objet du quotidien, sans valeur, une cuisine qui est cachée, en retrait de la vie sociale. La gastronomie, c'est donc aussi une histoire de dépossession et d'oppression. Et donc, je voyais beaucoup d'échos avec ce que Martin explorait dans le monde de l'agriculture, plus spécifiquement de l'agriculture urbaine. Comme elle, je pense que l'éthique du care offre un cadre praxéologique qui est essentiel pour repenser nos interactions, nos interdépendances et nos relations autrement que par le prisme capitalistique de la performance. En positionnant le care au sens large, puis surtout pas essentialiste du terme, dans nos manières de faire communauté, on se donne l'opportunité de revoir et de reconstruire nos architectures relationnelles. On peut s'appuyer donc sur des bases qui nous ressemblent, qui font sens, tout en critiquant, voire même en refusant la domination de certaines pratiques. Dans mes recherches, j'aborde les effets des emprunts aux pratiques entrepreneuriales. Donc je vois encore une fois beaucoup de similitudes avec ce que Martin décrit. Surtout, je vois des points de convergence dans les perspectives que l'éthique du care a à offrir pour un renouveau paradigmatique et ce que j'appelle éthique gastronomique. L'éthique gastronomique pourrait prendre racine dans l'éthique du care et donc s'inspirer de son intention politique avec une proposition qui est orientée davantage vers l'alimentation. Ça permettrait d'engager plus de sens, d'intentionnalité, en faisant de la gastronomie un acte qui est politique et social, qui dépasserait l'acte décomplexé de marchander simplement des biens nourriciers de manière désintéressée, uniquement pour se nourrir ou nourrir autrui. Induite par une éthique, la gastronomie pourrait devenir un moyen actif et tangible de repenser notre rapport au vivant et au non-vivant, en refusant la dualité nature-culture qui permet l'exploitation et l'extraction infinie des ressources. Plutôt, l'éthique gastronomique, ça pourrait proposer de prendre soin, comme l'éthique du care, du monde vivant et non vivant, des affects, des vulnérabilités qui font l'équilibre des écosystèmes qui nous nourrissent. De manière pratique, ça suppose évidemment de se positionner contre les logiques extractivistes qui réduisent les écosystèmes à une marchandise vide de sens, en habitant ces écosystèmes-là activement avec ce qui les habite et ceux et celles qui les habitent. Ce que je propose donc par l'éthique gastronomique, c'est une gastronomie qui est plus que simplement responsable, durable ou sociale. C'est un engagement réel, sensible avec ce qui nous habite, ce qu'on habite, puis de la manière dont on se nourrit tout le monde. L'article de Martin me rejoint donc profondément dans sa proposition, dans ce qu'elle mobilise et donne à espérer. Les approches féministes, comme l'éthique du quai, ont avantage à être au cœur de nos préoccupations et de nos actions. Je pense que c'est important de rester vigilant face aux pièges puis aux promesses de l'économie sociale et solidaire si celle-ci ne se positionne pas comme un outil de la transformation sociale, mais uniquement comme une pratique figée et cristallisée.
Food is, as I often say, everything. It is humanity's primary relationship, despite what often seems to pop up and demand more of our attention. Nonetheless, it permeates ourselves and our societies and our lands and our water. Food is what humans do, first and foremost. And so, by extension, the economies of food are the economies of everything, even though we often only mean and think about financial economies, the prices of food, its monetary value. But when you listen to people like our guests talk about the broader economies, the all-inclusive economies, the social and informal and gift economies, suddenly it all seems to make a lot more sense to be pluralist. Doesn't it? Many thanks to our thinkers and doers of household and planetary management, Alexia Moyer, Irena Knezevic, and Christophe Dubois. Thanks to their words, I feel both social and gifted. Digesting Food Studies executive producers are Rachel Engler-Stringer, Laurence Godin, Charles Lepko, Phil Loring, and Kristen Lowett. And I'm David Santo. As we near the end of Season 1 of the podcast, maybe it's a good time to go back and listen to some of our earlier episodes. From my position as host of this show, I see some very intriguing through lines emerging, but I'd love to hear what you think. Drop us a line or slide into our DMs and let us know what you're witnessing in DFS land. A fair while ago, I started to notice in my own life that the money coming into my pockets was not always directly linked to the work I was doing. I seemed to have income from jobs over here that derived from volunteer work I had done over there, and clients and employers were merging with colleagues and friends. My own economic system just wasn't so linear, I was discovering. And while I know that's a privileged and not so common way of being, it made me realize that my received knowledge of economies wasn't the only way to see things. Once again, I am just very, very grateful to be part of such a broad community of value, and it keeps making me wonder about how that reality could become more common.